Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this interview that we have set up with John Covach. He's a professor at the University of Rochester, professor of the Humanities. Though when I asked U of R for someone who could speak about pop culture, they said, it's John. There's not really anybody else. So congratulations on being known as the pop culture guy at U of R.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a real pleasure. And a heavy responsibility, which I hope I can live up to today.
Yeah, no, well, look, we're going to have fun. And the reason I had reached out to John is, like many of you, I watched the Billy Joel documentary, And So It Goes. And when I went to go find one of the clips in which he talks about how he made Uptown Girl, the first thing that popped up was actually a speech that he gave in Rochester in the mid-90s. And I thought to myself, look at that connection to Eastman Theater, to U of R. And I was just so intrigued by the docuseries. Why don't I first just get your take on it? You watched it, I think, over the last few days. What did you think of it?
It is really a fantastic documentary. But like most documentaries, not just in popular music or in entertainment, but just documentaries generally, in order to create a strong narrative or through line, you focus on certain things to the exclusion of others. So to the extent that it gives us a really interesting and compassionate picture of Billy Joel, the artist and the person, and a sort of a sense of his career. It's absolutely fantastic. So clever because you know the story and you're thinking, hey, how are they going to get this bit in? And there are always these really nice transitions from topic to topic. So it's very, very well edited. I think he comes across as somebody you'd like to sort of hang around with for an hour and just have a beer with and talk to. It's just a really nice guy.
Yeah, although there seemed to be an edge there.
Yeah,
he wants what he wants, and he made giant sacrifices along the way. And I found it interesting how much they concentrated on the departure of his father early on in his life.
Yeah. Right.
How sad that is.
Well, I mean, so here's a guy who grows up. Well, we think of him as being the New York guy, but Long Island, Hicksville. That's not skyscrapers and apartment buildings. So he grew up in what you could consider almost a kind of a middle America kind of upbringing. A mother and father who were divorced. Father went back to Europe after having immigrated here after Nazi persecution of his parents. I mean, for Pete's sake. And then the mother's got some real sort of manic depressive tendencies. She can be enormously effusive and supportive, but then there's a real downside there. And so he grew up with all of that. But he is a guy who is enormously gifted in a way that you can't teach. I mean, I teach at Eastman. We get these talented students come through all the time. And it isn't long into teaching when you realize there are some people who just have whatever that thing is for music. You can't teach it. The best you can do is direct it and coach it. Maybe it's like sports or something. Somebody's just got, you can help them refine what they have, but you can't, and somebody who has that, you can encourage it, but you can't place it in somebody who doesn't have it somehow, either naturally, DNA, whatever it is. Billy Joel has that thing. He is deeply, deeply musical.
You know what I find too so interesting, not just the genius, but I love studying the reaction to genius from other people, because some people are scared by it almost. It can be very, very intimidating because we don't fully understand it.
Well, yeah, that's probably right. In that way, his experience can be tracked across all kinds of different careers and people who are exceptional. I mean, it's no wonder he felt, when I get a sense from that film, that documentary, is maybe loneliness. So, you go through a few marriages, they start out great, but then he seems to withdraw, and at least if the stories are told pretty close to the way they happened, a guy that feels kind of alone. And that is kind of the two things that he has that can increase kind of a sense of aloneness that may come from his family upbringing. One is he's really gifted, and I think really, really smart. I mean, you don't write lyrics like that without being able.
And hadn't even graduated from high school.
Well, yeah, but that's not that kind of smart. It's the kind of looking at people, looking at situations, sizing them up, being able to generalize things, see the meaning one behind what's on the surface, this kind of thing. That kind of smart and being gifted, and then becoming a celebrity. If there's anything that isolates people from other people, it's celebrity. You would think it would be the opposite. But once you get famous, once you have money, you never know who's interested in you and who's interested in being a part of your celebrity, part of your wealth. In fact, he says that at one point when he was talking about one of the wives, maybe it was Christy Brinkley or something, and he says, you know, I tried to do the thing where that was the third one, this third wife, I tried to place, and she wasn't interested in any of my music or any of that kind of thing, and I thought to myself, maybe she really does just like me for me.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing somebody says who's sort of a celebrity and is always wondering, you know.
Yeah.
And so you get the sense that in the end, he loves a lot of people that he loves, a lot of great experiences, but somewhere deep and down there might be a kind of a loneliness, not to play armchair psychiatrist or that kind of thing, but, and maybe that's kind of what comes through the music is this deep sort of emotion and connectedness to other people, but the connection to other people is always fraught with a certain kind of conflict or contradiction. And so there's a sweet spot that you can sort of, when you're writing a song, that you can find, that if you can capture that, it will resonate with the listener, because if the song is not so specific that it's a particular narrative, but if it's general enough, it can resonate in my life, in your life. We can fill in the variables for the equation, but he can craft an equation that resonates with our own experience, and then the song becomes really meaningful to us because of our lives, no matter how it arose out of his life.
And resonate through the ages too. That
Yeah.
was an interesting point. Not every great artist can sing their songs that made them famous 30, 40 years later and still attract a sellout crowd at Madison Square Garden. And so for him to be able to do that, it speaks to the type of music he wrote almost beyond his years in his 20s. So now in some ways, when he sings it now, it almost seems more appropriate in a way.
Well, I think one of the rock critics that is one of the talking heads makes that
Yes.
same
Oh,
point.
yeah.
Some of these songs are better sung by a man his age now, and maybe we're a little weird for a guy in his 20s, New York State of Mind. You know, it's very much a kind of sort of a Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett kind of song. And, you know, for him to be singing it now, gray, you know, a little and older, you know, it has a kind of a maturity to it. I think the funny thing about Billy Joel is during the day, so I graduated from high school in '77. So his first success, I remember the Stranger album coming out. We had it. I think it is, by the way, his masterpiece album. There's hardly a weak song in any of Billy Joel's album, but that one. But you know, when he first came out, there was a sense that maybe he wasn't quite the hip guy to be listening to. It maybe had a little bit of that kind of, I mean, the critics in the documentary say it's a question of inauthenticity or something like that, but for guys like me who grew up listening to, you know, Led Zeppelin and Yes and Jethro Tull and groups like that, Billy Joel seemed a little bit show busy to us, you know. But the fact is, people who listen, people forget about all that. And the fact that it wasn't as hip in its time as other things were, has actually freed it from feeling dated. So if it's not, you know, linked to 1977, all of a sudden, it becomes sort of general use in terms of so the songs can live on and find new context to be meaningful, and because they're not so desperately wedded. Whereas if I ask you about Vanilla Fudge's version of You Keep Me Hanging On,
Right.
that song is severely locked in 1967.
Right.
It's very hard to find any kind of a new use for it that isn't kind of, you know, retro or kitschy or some kind of thing like that.
No, that's an excellent observation, and I think he himself, the base of his music, let's say it's lounge or classical, those types of genres are perennial, everlasting. So, you know, the base of his music, while others may have glommed on to the synthesizer and the beats of the 80s and it makes them dated, because at the base of his music, he chose unintentionally some of the most enduring genres around. And so I don't listen to his music and say, oh, that's 80s.
Well, there are some funny things, interesting things about his style. When people are criticizing, they call him a chameleon. He doesn't have his own style. He's really always doing some version of somebody else's style. I don't think that's really quite true. There's not a Billy Joel track you can play where at some point you don't say, gosh, isn't that Billy Joel? I mean, he has his sound. And a lot of other musicians were playing around with other styles. I mean, the Beatles, for example, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, every single track is in a kind of different style. Paul McCartney especially, in the mid-70s, Freddie Mercury, all kinds of artists were playing around with different styles. So, you know, in many ways, he was doing that same kind of thing, creating a kind of a very broad kind of stylistic palette for his music.
Yeah, some of the criticisms I could relate to or understand. That one I really couldn't, because I don't think just because you're versatile, you should be labeled as a chameleon.
But you know, when I think about Billy Joel now, I mean, when in 1977 I would have said it differently when I was, you know, in high school. But when I look back at him now as a, you know, historian of rock music, looking at the big picture of popular music in the 20th century, he strikes me as an American singer-songwriter who just happens to have become popular during the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
So the things that are characteristic of the 70s and the 80s are really kind of points of style or sort of extra kind of artifacts. But at the center of it is a guy who's a singer-songwriter in the same way as, say, you know, well, a songwriter in the same way as somebody as Cole Porter and George and Ira Gershwin or somebody. He's very much a kind of, and there is a very strong musical theater or great American songbook component to Billy Joel's approach. I mean, it's part of his background. His parents, you know, first met in a production of Gilbert and Sullivan. His mom knew, they knew what, there's clips of him doing show tunes. He knew, so there's very much a sense that he's a kind of a songwriter who's writing songs in the grand tradition of American songs. You might not say that so much about somebody like Bob Dylan, although on a couple of albums he has sort of returned to that as a kind of way of experimenting with that. But the whole folk and rock tradition and blues tradition is a different one in many ways from the one that Billy Joel is a part of, which is this big American songwriter tradition.
No, I agree with that, and it made me think. I hadn't thought about this, but several years ago there was some big critique of Billy Joel. I can't remember what magazine it was in, but it was supposed to be contrarian and almost a little bombastic, and they basically called Billy Joel out and said he's fake because the stories he sings about aren't his own.
Yeah.
And I thought two things, having watched the documentary. One, I was surprised how many songs are actually related to his own life. I had no idea. He's lived such an incredible life. And then the other is, who cares? The storytellers aren't there to tell their own story. Great storytellers, whether it be Bruce Springsteen or look at all of the folk artists who sing about other people's stories. Isn't that expected? I was kind of surprised that would be criticized.
Yeah, but you know, it's all about image. I mean, people are criticizing an image. You know, unfortunately, I have to say, I have a lot of rock critic friends. There's some wonderful ones. I depend on their work, but a lot of them, they're looking for a pull quote. You know, they're looking for something to say that sparks discussion. And so sometimes to do that, you have to exaggerate and say things that are slightly inaccurate. Well, but I would mention two things about Billy Joel and on that point. One is, be careful if you have a close personal relationship with the songwriter. At some point, you're going to end up in it.
I think Taylor Swift's circle could tell you that.
Well, I didn't want to mention that, but you know. And the second thing is, Elton John never wrote a single one of those lyrics. All of the lyrics were written by Bernie Taupin.
I didn't know that.
So if you want to think about Elton John and Billy Joel as kind of being competitors or compatriots or contemporaries, even though Elton had his success much earlier, you know, they toured together. They're friendly, then not friendly, then friendly again. You know, you can say, well, Billy Joel's, you know, his lyrics, but at least they're his lyrics. Elton John's lyrics are not his lyrics; they're Bernie Taupin's lyrics. Now, I don't hold that against Elton John either. I'm on your side. I think, you know, a song is a song. If it captures a sense that transfers to others and they find meaningful, that's, I mean, you know, you can't say that Cole Porter experienced everything that he talks about in his songs, or even Dylan, for example. You know, whose lyrics are, you know, sort of universally thought of as being, you know, at the top of the line.
Yeah, and I've learned recently a couple of James Taylor's biggest hits were not his songs. You know, that doesn't mean like that suddenly diminishes him as a performer. In fact, it enhances it, because look at what they were able to do with someone else's words. You know, you can look at it so differently in that regard. And I think that the Billy Joel, when he stopped here in Rochester, what was interesting is he did give the version of how he came up with Uptown Girl, and if you play it like a classical music, that musical piece, that's the way it sounds. And then he kind of added the Frankie Valli twang to it, you know, that kind of like high-pitched nasally thing.
Right, yeah.
That's how you got Uptown Girl. And what struck me is apparently he went on a tour of college campuses. It was like, I don't know, 30, 40, but how energetic he was before a smaller crowd in Rochester than, you know, he played before tens of thousands of people, but how the performer was just built into his soul when he was here.
Well, it's like a lot of people that are born performers. It doesn't matter how small the group is. The minute they're on stage, they light up. And oftentimes that person on stage is kind of a different person from the person who's not on stage. It's still part of them, but it's only available to you when the lights are on and the show is on. So he, you know, I would imagine that if he walked in this room and sat down and started speaking with the two of us, he'd be the same animated Billy Joel. You know, if we're filming and it's going out, he's that guy. And it really is who he is. But probably you couldn't take a person being that way in every you go out.
It's so true. Jim Carrey, I think, recently said, he goes, I've played the role of Jim Carrey for a long time, and I think I'm kind of done. And I thought that was very interesting.
You know, George Harrison in 1964 makes a very interesting remark in one of those early interviews, you know, where they're always sticking microphones in front of the Beatles, and just the very beginning, you know. And he says, sometimes I'm reading the paper, and I'll read this story, and it's about this guy George Harrison, and you know, it doesn't seem like it's me at all. It's like I'm reading about another person.
Yeah.
Billy Joel says exactly the same kind of thing, you know, about you know, I'm tired of being this Billy Joel guy.
Yeah.
I want to, you know, which just means that there is a kind of a persona. All of us who are in the public eye to some extent know that there is a persona that is part of our public-facing
and some people have to take it to the extreme. So I interviewed Gilbert Gottfried a few years ago. He had come into town to play a comedy at the Carlson. And he was this soft-spoken, demure character. And I thought, is he okay? So he sits down, we're talking, he's asking me questions, you know, where are you from? That's really nice. And then I say, okay, well, we're going to start here. If you can, I always say, can you say and spell your name? And he goes like this. He comes, Gil, and I realized that he was living his shtick. Like, he was actually living his persona, and that was not him. But it wasn't just on a TV show or a movie or whatnot. Whenever he was out in public, he was living the Gilbert Gottfried that he had created.
Yeah. So imagine, I mean, this isn't just Billy Joel, but think about all of these performers and, you know, film actors and theater people. What if that's how it works for you? And then you become rich, you become famous, so you're even further isolated, and you've got a family life where you're not really quite sure. I mean, you're damaged, you know, from the emotional turmoil of it. Man, can you imagine that might lead to certain kinds of real serious emotional problems? Sure you can.
Yeah.
You know, and that these guys survive. I mean, maybe Billy Joel's biggest accomplishment in many ways is that he didn't kill himself.
Yeah.
I mean, he survived all of this, and now there's this fantastic documentary about him where he's able to look back at his life and sort of take some stock. I mean, those last 3 or 4 songs on that album from 1993, River of Dreams, you know, he's really taking stock, looking back at his whole life and thinking about what things were important to him. It's nice to be in a position to be able to do that. There are some people who burn out much earlier than that and never have that opportunity.
I know, and his story, I guess I was surprised at how easily it fell into that stereotype of the 70s rock star, no guardrails, management that creates a contract that is just awful.
Yeah.
There were no protections, no guardrails, just a frenzy of offers and temptations. And he kind of lived that. Now, he did have his wife, his manager, kind of by his side, but still, I mean, wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a case with regard to a lot of the '60s rockers as they came up too. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody got so rich so fast, and most of them didn't come from money.
Yeah.
And they didn't know anybody who'd ever had a lot of money, so they didn't really know what to do once they had a lot of money. They thought it was going to last forever, and they spent it and didn't care because it was always there. You know, if you came from a family that was a little bit more sort of established financially, you know, your father or your uncle or somebody might pull you aside and say, listen, son, let's live the life, but you need to punch about 50% of this you need to put away for later, for a rainy day. And then, you know, you wouldn't have a manager. I love the story about them going down the East Coast, and everywhere they went, somebody said, oh, didn't you just buy a property down here? Didn't you just? They were like,
and it
no,
turns out
no.
his former brother-in-law had become his manager and was stealing his money. It's so...
To find out about it, like, hang on a minute, I don't own all this stuff, or do I?
You know what was interesting too? So he went back on the road and created Nylon Curtain in order to earn back the money that he felt he lost. And part of that was so he could, you know, have security for him and his family. But in doing so, it appears to have been a giant factor in him losing his family, his wife, and things like that. I mean, what a classic allegory! What a classic story that you hear. That it's like, in order to do something, you know, it's, what do they say? The road to hell's paved in gold. You wanted to do this, but it actually led to the result that you were trying to avoid. You know, the Skywalker, you know, the Star Wars type thing.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
fascinating to me.
Yeah. You know, if we have a minute, I'd like to just sort of say why I think The Stranger is such a fantastic record.
Yeah, please.
And something that came up in the documentary that I did not know. I did not know that Billy Joel had, you know, I mean, so they were teetering on the end of getting dropped by the label. And so the story is just at the moment when it looked like they could be dropped, they come up with the big, what people would say, if there's one album, one Billy Joel album you had to say is the album, I think a lot of people would say The Stranger is that record. Arguably there are others, but certainly that one would be in contention. And so that's a great story. But so he's looking around for producers and he asks George Martin. So George Martin, you know.
I think George Martin came to him, didn't he?
Well, George Martin came to see a show.
Yes.
To sort of, you know, see what the band did, and he said, I'd love to produce you, but I'm going to use studio musicians. Now, you think, well, and so Billy Joel makes a big point of saying, love me, love my band, and sort of turning down George Martin. And so that makes for a colorful story. And actually, you have to defend George Martin, because at that time, the idea of using, you know, studio musicians to produce the kind of singer-songwriter stuff that Billy Joel was doing was actually a pretty common strategy. I mean, by that time, Steely Dan had turned it into like a kind of almost a patented procedure. You got the two guys, Becker and Faget, and everybody who's playing are the top studio musicians in LA and New York. You know, so it wasn't a bad idea on George Martin's part. But then, now it makes me look at The Stranger differently, and I see how it seems to me that whether he was trying to do it consciously or not, he had wrote into that album certain Beatleisms, as if to say, you know, you didn't want to produce me and my band, you know, check this out. So the two that are probably the most obvious is Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, which basically takes the whole second side of Abbey Road, putting together different sort of song fragments, you know, to create a larger kind of piece like that. Very much kind of Abbey Road. I don't know what, I mean, they talk about Phil Ramone being, the guy who did produce it, being involved in it, but there must have been some sense of, you know, to heck with you, George Martin, if that's your attitude, we're going to show you how this is done. And the second one is that Billy Joel wrote a song, Just the Way You Are, maybe in many ways kind of his signature song next to Piano Man, that it's a song that Paul McCartney could have written. I mean, in fact, during that time, Paul McCartney and Wings, you think of songs like My Love, Silly Love Song. Next to those, Just the Way You Are is a very kind of close thing. And so in the documentary, it's brilliant. They cut to Paul McCartney, and he says, I'm often asked if there's a song I wish I had written. And Just the Way You Are is that song. Yeah. So it's perfect when you put it together with like all the other sort of like Beatleisms on that album. it really sort of captures this sense of Billy Joel as the rebel who gets turned down by the Beatles producer, and then does a record in which he does all kind of Beatles things just to show him, here, take this.
Yeah, you have to, that's a great analysis of it. You just have to appreciate the chutzpah that went into something like that, and belief at the end of the day in his own talent, and his own ability to make the music that he wanted to make.
And Vienna, if I would pick one Billy Joel song, that's the one.
I was gonna
For
ask
me,
you
it
about
has
that.
a very, very, that's one of those cases where that song I can really relate to because of aspects of my own life. It was important to me at that time. In the bands that I was playing with, it was sort of like one of my feature vocal songs, Then I went to Vienna on a Fulbright and lived there for a year, And I always thought the song was about somebody who, slow down, you crazy child, you're so ambitious for a juvenile, the kind of hurry up towards success, you're going to burn yourself out kind of thing, But the line, Vienna waits for you, never really quite sure what he meant by that. The obvious interpretation would be Vienna, Freud, be careful, you're going to, burn yourself out and have an emotional breakdown and you're going to need analysis. But that never seemed quite right to me. And then in the video, in the documentary, we find out the father was living in Vienna. He goes to Vienna. He sees a whole different sort of aspect of life. There's classical music there, of course, but there's also something I learned when I was in Vienna called Wiener Tempo. And the North Germans, they love to sort of disparage the Viennese for being slow. They have a more leisurely pace. They're willing to take time to do things, And so sometimes the North Germans will say, I haven't got time for Wiener Tempo, which means hurry up, That is what that line means. Slow down, you crazy child. Vienna, or Vienna time,
And
the slow down waits for you.
wonderful.
That's
John,
fantastic.
it is fantastic. And now I'm going to listen to the song differently because of that input. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. I feel like we could do another half hour, but we're going to cut it short for the sake of our viewers here. And I am so glad that you came and talked, and I'm sure that there are going to be other documentaries and musical adventures that are going to pop up, and I hope to have you back.
Let's talk about it.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, John.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you back here tomorrow.